If you'd asked me 5 years ago what freedom looked like, I wouldn't have described a high-rise apartment or a glossy downtown loft. No, for me, freedom looked like my first place in Cedar Springs, Ohio, a squat little one-bedroom tucked over a pawn shop that specialized in vintage, electronics, junk. The carpet was the color of old oatmeal. The kitchen had exactly 2 cabinets, both with handles that fell off if you pulled too hard. The landlord promised to fix the leaky bathroom faucet real soon, which turned out to be code for never. But you know what? It was mine. After college, 4 years of cheap coffee, all-nighters, and exactly zero help from the family trust, I'd scraped together enough from my part-time IT gigs to sign the lease. My parents called it a phase. My mom said I was wasting money pretending to be independent. Dad said I'd come running home once real life smacked me. I didn't. I got a used 2007 Corolla off a sketchy lot where the salesman tried to upsell me air fresheners that smelled like battery acid. The car had a dent the size of a basketball in the passenger door, and made this sad gargling noise when it started, like it was begging to be put out of its misery. But it got me to work. And that was all I needed. I furnished my apartment with Craigslist treasures, a futon with a spring that stabbed me every time I shifted, a rickety desk with a giant sticker that said, "Do not sit," and a dresser that leaned so hard to the left I had to wedge an old calculus textbook under it to keep it from toppling over. Kayla, my younger sister, came by exactly once. She walked in wearing a sweater that probably cost more than my entire living room and wrinkled her nose like she just walked into a biohazard zone. "Wow," she said, looking around with her phone already out to snap photos. "It's quaint. Do you actually live like this, or is it some minimalist performance art?" I bit my tongue so hard I tasted blood. Better she think it was a phase. Let her believe I was just playing house, not actually building a life. Because honestly, I was proud. Proud that every chipped mug, every rent payment, every grocery run paid with my own debit card was a small victory. I learned to budget like my life depended on it. Ate off-brand cereal, bought dented cans from the clearance rack, and figured out exactly how many days you could stretch a bottle of shampoo past empty. Answer: 4. Month by month, I watched my savings inch forward. $500. $1,500. $3,000. $7,000. I started daydreaming about the future. Some little fixer-upper where I could finally take a shower without someone's old moldy cock staring back at me. Maybe a rescue dog who wouldn't care that I'd grown up the afterthought. Some nights, I'd sit cross-legged on that lumpy futon with my laptop propped on a pizza box, scrolling listings for cheap houses in small towns. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. I thought I was free. I thought I'd finally proven myself too stubborn to be reeled back in. But with my family, there was no such thing as enough. And sooner or later, they'd find a way to make my independence look like a personal insult. If my independence was a dingy Corolla and discount laundry detergent, Kayla's life was a revolving carousel of designer shopping bags and Instagram filters. She was 4 years younger than me, but you'd never guess it the way my parents treated her, like she'd been born with a halo and a personalized credit card. When she turned 16, they gave her a brand new silver Audi. I remember standing in the driveway, holding the camera, pretending to be thrilled as she squealed and hugged Dad like he'd cured cancer. Meanwhile, when I asked to borrow the family minivan at 17 so I could drive to my part-time job, Dad handed me a bus schedule. "It builds character," he'd said, flipping through the mail without looking at me. Kayla's birthday parties were Pinterest fever dreams. Custom cakes shaped like Chanel bags, ice sculptures spelling her name in cursive, floral backdrops for candid photos she'd spend hours staging. One year, she got a gold bracelet engraved with Limitless. When I graduated college, they gave me a reusable grocery bag stuffed with dollar store snacks and a card that said, "Proud of you. Now get to work." Every time I visited, Kayla would find some new way to remind me exactly where I sat in the family hierarchy. Like the time she waltzed into my apartment uninvited, she still had a spare key she never returned, and flopped onto my lumpy futon with the kind of theatrical groan you'd expect from someone forced to endure peasantry. "You," she said, peering around at my thrift store furniture and bare walls. I thought this aesthetic went out in, like, 2010. You know you can finance real stuff, right? Yeah, I said, picking up the takeout containers she just kicked over. But then I wouldn't be able to fund your latte habit by existing. She waved me off like I was a stray thought. I'm serious, Ethan. You should take better care of yourself. You look tired. Translation: you look like someone who works for a living. It wasn't just the big gestures. It was the small, constant reminders that in my parents' eyes, she'd always be the golden child. The chosen one. When Mom talked about her, it was all admiration. She's so ambitious. She's got vision. Kayla's vision was a YouTube channel about skincare she never actually updated, but sure, whatever helped Mom sleep at night. When I came up in conversation, the tone shifted to mild embarrassment. Ethan's very practical, Mom would say, like it was a defect she was trying to frame as a virtue. It didn't matter that I paid all my own bills or that I never asked for a cent. Kayla was the investment. I was the lesson in self-reliance. And the worst part? I kept trying to prove I could be enough for them anyway. Like one day they'd wake up, see me grinding away at my little IT job, living in my postage stamp apartment, and think, wow, he really made something of himself. But the truth was, they only noticed when they needed something. And pretty soon, they were going to need a lot. It happened on a Wednesday afternoon. I remember because I was sitting in my cubicle, microwaving leftover spaghetti, when my phone started vibrating like it was trying to escape my pocket. 6 missed calls from Mom. 3 from Dad. I thought someone had died. By the time I stepped outside to call them back, my stomach was in knots. Dad answered on the first ring. Ethan, he said, voice low and grave. We need to talk. I braced myself. What's wrong? He sighed dramatically, the way he did whenever a cashier dared ask him for exact change. I lost my job. I closed my eyes. Not because I didn't care, but because I already knew where this conversation was headed. Mom took the phone next. Her voice was wet with practiced tears. Sweetheart, it's just temporary. But your father's severance isn't enough to cover everything. And you know how expensive Kayla's tuition is. She's in the middle of such an important year. I could practically hear her looking at Kayla across the kitchen, the two of them nodding at each other like this was all perfectly reasonable. Your father and I were thinking, she continued, maybe you could move back home for a while. Help out. Just until we get back on our feet. I leaned against the brick wall of my office building, feeling my throat tighten. Mom, I have my own place. My own bills. I know, she said quickly. But you're so good with money. You've always been disciplined. Translation: you're the only one responsible enough to bail us out. And what exactly are you asking? I said, though I already knew. There was a long pause. Then, $1,800 a month, she whispered. Just to cover Kayla's tuition and the mortgage. I let out a short, humorless laugh. That's more than my rent. It's just temporary, she insisted. A couple of months, maybe 3. I should have said no right then. Should have told her I'd worked too hard to crawl back into that house with the sagging roof and the endless criticisms. But I didn't. Because despite everything, despite the years of feeling like a footnote in my own family, I still loved them. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I thought maybe if I helped now, it would finally prove I was worthy of their respect. So that night, I packed up my apartment. I folded my dreams of a down payment and a quiet life into cardboard boxes and hauled them back to the house where Kayla had never once been told no. Mom stood in the driveway as I pulled up. She was smiling like she'd won something. Oh, sweetheart, she said, opening her arms. I knew you'd do the right thing. I hugged her back, but my heart wasn't in it. And for the first time, a voice in my head whispered, you just made the worst mistake of your life. If you've ever wondered how long, just a couple of months, can actually stretch, I have the answer, indefinitely. At first, I tried to convince myself it was fine. My old bedroom smelled like stale air freshener and Dad's collection of vintage golf trophies no one had dusted in a decade, but it was at least familiar. The first week, Mom insisted on cooking every meal, like old times, which mostly meant overcooked casseroles and forced conversations about how We're so proud you're here for the family. Kayla breezed in from college a few days later, acting like I'd moved into her house. She hauled in 3 oversized suitcases, 2 garment bags, and a ring light the size of a satellite dish for her. Content. On the 3rd morning, I was standing at the counter making coffee, instant, because apparently a real coffee maker was too fancy, when Kayla shuffled in wearing a designer robe that probably cost more than my car. She looked me over, her nose wrinkling like she'd caught a whiff of something sour. "Wow," she said, leaning against the fridge. "You look tired." "It's a lot of work funding your lifestyle," I said flatly. She didn't laugh. Just shrugged and pulled out almond milk with her name written on the lid in pink Sharpie. God forbid I drink the sacred milk. Dad was still unemployed for a while, but he didn't exactly rush to fix it. I overheard him on the phone with Uncle Rich, bragging about how he was taking time to explore options, as if the mortgage fairy was going to swing by and cover everything. 6 weeks in, he finally landed a new job. I only found out because I came home early and heard him gloating about his big comeback. I waited, stupidly, for them to tell me I could stop paying the $1,800. Maybe get my own life back. Instead, at dinner that night, Mom looked across the table and said, "Your father's new salary isn't quite what it used to be. So if you could keep helping, just for a little while longer." The meatloaf was overcooked. The mashed potatoes were instant. But the entitlement? Perfectly seasoned. "Just a little longer," I echoed, feeling something snap behind my ribs. Dad didn't even pretend to look embarrassed. He just cleared his throat and said, "It's family, Ethan. We all pitch in." I glanced at Kayla, who was too busy taking a photo of her dinner to notice the conversation. She positioned her plate next to a bouquet of roses and a linen napkin she didn't buy, just so her followers could see how aesthetic her life was. The next morning, I woke up to an overdraft notification because Mom had charged Kayla's textbooks to my card. By mistake. I'd been there 3 months. 3 turned into 6. 6 turned into 8. Every paycheck, I handed over that money like it was a monthly tax on my own self-respect. Every day, I sat in traffic to a job I didn't hate but couldn't love, because it no longer felt like it was building anything. At night, I lay awake in my childhood bed, staring at the glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling. The same ones I used to wish on when I was 10, praying to be noticed. Somewhere in that quiet, a thought started to form, cold and undeniable. They were never going to let me leave. And if I didn't do something soon, I was never going to have a life of my own again. By month 9, the house felt less like a family home and more like a corporate timeshare I was paying to maintain. Every day was the same. I'd get up at 6 a.m. to beat traffic, creep around the kitchen trying not to wake Kayla, who still hadn't managed to find a part-time job because she was too focused on her personal brand, and then come home 12 hours later to a list of things I was apparently responsible for. The lights flickered in the hallway. "Ethan, can you call the electrician and pay for it? Kayla's car needed new tires?" "Well, you're so good with money. The internet bill was overdue." "We thought you could handle that, since you work in tech." It was like every dollar I earned had a neon sign over it, "Take me." I kept telling myself it was temporary. That any day now, they'd wake up, realize I'd sacrificed everything for them, and feel a sliver of gratitude. Spoiler, they didn't. If anything, my contributions became invisible. Expected. Just part of the household ecosystem, like the fridge or the leaky faucet Dad still hadn't fixed. The real kicker was Kayla. One Friday night, I came home exhausted, hoping for a quiet evening, and found her in the living room surrounded by shopping bags. Designer logos everywhere, shoes, purses, a new coat that probably cost more than my Corolla's blue book value. She didn't even look up from her phone. "Oh," she said, waving a manicured hand. "Can you Venmo me half for this? It was on sale." I blinked, certain I'd misheard. "For what?" "The coat," she said, her voice slowing like she was explaining basic arithmetic to a toddler. "It was such a good deal, I figured you'd want to help me cover it. You always say I should have something warm." I laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was so absurd, my brain refused to process it any other way. "Kayla, I'm not buying you a coat." Her mouth fell open. Wow. Selfish much? Selfish. The word stuck in my head like a splinter. I'd given up my apartment, my savings, my sanity. I'd funded every bill, every little crisis, every overpriced textbook. But the moment I said, no, I was the villain. Later that night, I overheard Mom and Dad talking in the kitchen. He's getting arrogant, Mom whispered, like I was a stray dog that needed training. We'll have to remind him who made sacrifices first. I stood in the hallway, back pressed against the wall, feeling something ugly and heavy pull in my chest. That was when I started paying closer attention. I looked at the bank statements I'd been too tired to check. I saw the charges: spa days, luxury skincare, fancy dinners out while I ate stale cereal in my car between shifts. I realized they hadn't been scraping by. They'd been thriving. On me. They didn't need me. They just liked having a personal ATM who didn't complain. And for the first time, the quiet resentment in my chest started to crystallize into something sharper. Resolve. I didn't know how or when, but I knew one thing for certain. This was going to end. The final straw didn't look dramatic at first. No screaming. No slamming doors. Just a bright Saturday morning and a casual question that detonated everything. I just walked in from the grocery store, arms full of cheap canned soup I was going to live on for the next 2 weeks. Kayla was sprawled on the couch, scrolling through her phone with that bored, half-lidded stare she reserved for peasants and customer service reps. She didn't even look up. Hey, she called lazily. Before you put your stuff away, can you Venmo me $700? I almost dropped the bag. For what? She sighed, like I was personally inconveniencing her by asking. My friends are planning a beach trip. Flights are on sale, but I need to book today. I stared at her, feeling my pulse spike behind my eyes. You want me to pay for your vacation? She finally looked up, blinking innocently. Well, yeah? You're always telling me to take time for self-care. I set the grocery bag down so I wouldn't accidentally hurl it across the room. Kayla, I said, voice low and trembling. I am paying for this house. For your textbooks. For your car insurance. For your fancy gluten-free everything. And you want $700 so you can go tan in Cancun? She wrinkled her nose. It's Tulum. God, Ethan, you're so dramatic. I felt something snap. Dramatic? I said, louder this time. You think this is dramatic? Do you have any idea how much I've given up to keep this place running? How many times I've had to pick between paying your bills and paying my own? She shrugged, twirling her hair around her finger. You're acting like you're some martyr. Maybe you should have worked harder if you wanted a better life. I laughed, a harsh, brittle sound that tasted like acid in my mouth. Oh, I did work harder, I said. I worked hard enough to support 3 adults who never thought twice about how much they were draining me. Right then, Dad walked in. He looked from me to Kayla and frowned. What's going on? He asked, in that tired, disappointed voice I'd heard my whole life. Your son is losing it, Kayla said, rolling her eyes. Just because I asked for a little help. Dad set his coffee mug down with a heavy thunk. How dare you speak to your sister that way? The room tilted. How dare I? I choked. Are you kidding me? Mom appeared behind him, arms folded. Ethan, this attitude is exactly why we were worried about you moving back. You're so selfish. That word again. It was like they tattooed it on my forehead. I looked around the kitchen, the polished countertops I'd paid to replace, the stocked pantry I'd filled, the heating bill I'd covered all winter, and realized there was no bottom to their entitlement. If I gave them everything, they'd still say I hadn't done enough. Something in me settled, cold and final. Fine, I said, voice calm in a way that made Kayla finally look nervous. If that's how you feel, you can figure it out yourselves. I walked past them, up to my old room, and shut the door behind me. I didn't pack yet. But in that moment I knew. I was done. For 3 days, no one spoke to me. Mom clattered dishes around the kitchen like she was auditioning for a passive-aggressive cooking show. Dad sat in his recliner, flipping through the TV guide with the volume up so high I could feel it vibrating in my chest. Kayla mostly sulked in her room, the door cracked just enough so I could hear her complaining on speakerphone. I started counting down the days until my next paycheck. Until I could afford first month's rent somewhere, anywhere, that didn't smell like stale resentment and floor polish. But then, like clockwork, the final insult arrived. I came home early from work that Friday. The driveway was empty, strange enough. I stepped inside, bracing for more cold shoulder silence. Instead, I found an envelope on the kitchen table. My name in Mom's looping script, a little heart over the I in Ethan, like that made it sweet instead of ominous. Inside was a glossy brochure for an all-inclusive resort. At first, I thought it was some weird attempt at reconciliation. Like maybe they'd planned a family vacation to smooth things over. Then I saw the dates, next week, and the names listed on the reservation: Mom, Dad, and Kayla. No Ethan. Just 3 tickets. My jaw clenched so hard it hurt. I flipped to the back page and found the payment details, paid in full by family account. The same family account I'd been pouring my salary into for almost a year. I didn't even have time to process the betrayal before Kayla's voice floated in from the hallway. "Oh, you found it," she said, smiling like this was all perfectly normal. "We figured we deserved a break. You know, after all the stress." "You used my money," I said, voice hoarse. She blinked innocently. "Well, you weren't doing anything fun with it." I looked at her, at the person who'd once cried when her phone got scratched, who'd called me obsessed with scarcity when I refused to co-sign her first credit card, and I realized she genuinely didn't think she'd done anything wrong. Dad came in, a suitcase in hand. He looked tired but not sorry. "You're overreacting," he said gruffly. "This is just how families help each other. We're all entitled to enjoy the money you contribute." "Entitled?" I repeated, my voice rising. "Entitled to steal from me?" Mom walked in behind him, tucking her boarding pass into her purse. She didn't even meet my eyes. "If you wanted to come, you should have earned more," she said quietly. The room went silent. It was so absurd I almost laughed. They were going to Cancun without me, using the money I'd given them because they'd cried about bills and emergencies. That was the moment any last flicker of guilt in my chest snuffed out. "I hope you enjoy it," I said, my voice calm in a way that scared even me. Kayla opened her mouth to say something else, but I didn't stick around to hear it. I turned and walked out of the house. I didn't know exactly where I was going. But for the first time, I knew exactly what I was leaving behind. You'd think after the Cancun stunt, there wouldn't be any more surprises left. But you'd be underestimating my family's creativity in the art of betrayal. I spent the next 2 weeks sleeping on a coworker's lumpy sofa, applying for apartments I couldn't quite afford yet. My phone lit up occasionally with messages from Mom. "We need to talk. You're being unreasonable. This is your family." I didn't reply. Then came my birthday. I wasn't expecting much. Maybe a half-hearted text, or, if they were feeling particularly theatrical, some sanctimonious card about moving forward. Instead, I got a phone call from Dad. "We'd like you to stop by," he said, voice stiff. "There's something here for you." Against my better judgment, I went. Part of me still believed maybe, just maybe, they'd finally say sorry. When I pulled up, the driveway was lined with balloons. A banner hung over the garage that read, "Happy birthday, Ethan." For a second, I thought I'd stepped into some alternate universe. Then I walked inside. Kayla sat on the couch, tapping her phone. Mom was in the kitchen, arranging a cake that looked suspiciously store-bought. Dad stood beside a giant box wrapped in shiny silver paper. "Happy birthday, sweetheart," Mom said with a strained smile. I glanced around. "What is this?" Dad gestured to the box. "Your gift." I peeled back the paper. Inside was a luggage set, expensive, monogrammed, the kind you see influencers rolling through airports. For a moment, I was too stunned to speak. Kayla looked up from her phone and smirked. "Consider it a hint." My stomach dropped. "A hint?" Mom folded her arms. "Ethan, we've decided it's time you moved on. You've overstayed your welcome here." I stared at her, my hands going cold. "You're kicking me out." Dad cleared his throat. "We're not kicking you out. We're encouraging you to be independent." My jaw tightened. "I gave you everything I had. You promised this was temporary." Mom's eyes narrowed. And we didn't ask you to. You made that choice. Now it's time for you to grow up. Kayla let out a soft laugh. Besides, Dad's been back at work for 6 months. We don't need your money anymore. The words hit me like a slap. 6 months? Dad didn't meet my gaze. Consider this payback. For all the years we raised you. I felt something snap so cleanly inside me it almost hurt. Fine, I said, my voice steady. You want me gone? I'm gone. I picked up the suitcase, cold and glossy in my hands, and walked out the door. No one followed. No one called after me. I climbed into my dented Corolla, shut the door, and sat there for a long time, breathing hard. I thought I'd feel shattered. But instead I felt relief. Because the truth was, that house had never been a home. It was a transaction I'd been paying for with my soul. And I was finally done. I spent the first night after my birthday eviction in the cheapest hostel I could find. The mattress felt like a stack of newspapers wrapped in plastic, and the room smelled like burned popcorn and despair. But when I woke up the next morning, something in my chest felt lighter. No more wondering if they'd ever appreciate me. No more bargaining my dignity for scraps of affection. I was finally free. My first move was practical. I closed the joint account they'd been using as their personal piggy bank. It was easier than I thought, just a few clicks and a confirmation email. The second move was harder. I called my old landlord, the one with the perpetually missing eyebrows, and asked if the studio apartment I'd left behind was still available. He laughed. Kid, it's been sitting empty for months. You want it? It's yours. I didn't have much left to move in, just a duffel bag of clothes, a couple of boxes, and the fancy luggage they'd given me to kick me out. It felt poetic to roll it across the cracked tile floor and park it in the corner. The place looked exactly as I remembered, yellowed blinds, a tiny kitchenette, walls that needed painting. But it felt like possibility. The first week was weirdly peaceful. I didn't have furniture, so I ate dinner sitting on the floor, balancing my plate on an upside-down laundry basket. One night, I sat cross-legged in that bare room with a can of cheap soup and thought, this is mine. No one could barge in and demand my money. No one could accuse me of being selfish for not funding their next vacation. A week later, I got a call from my manager. We've been meaning to talk to you, she said. Your performance has been remarkable, considering everything you've been dealing with. If you're interested, we'd like to offer you a promotion. I almost dropped my phone. She laughed. Think about it. We'll bump your salary. Better benefits. You deserve it. I accepted before she could change her mind. That night, I celebrated by splurging on takeout from the nice Thai place down the block. I ate pad CW on the floor, alone, feeling something close to content. A week after that, I met someone. His name was Marcus. He worked in supply chain logistics and had this easy, genuine way about him, like he'd never learned how to be dismissive. We met for coffee, then dinner. By the third date, I told him everything. The years of being treated like an ATM. The birthday suitcase. The Cancun trip. He didn't flinch. Sounds like you've been carrying other people for way too long, he said, reaching across the table. You don't have to do that anymore. I believed him. Slowly, I started to imagine a life that didn't revolve around my family's crises. A life built on choice instead of obligation. The place still looked like a mess, but it felt like a blank page. And for the first time in as long as I could remember, I was excited to start writing something new. 6 months passed in a blur of small triumphs. I settled into my new role at work, moved out of the hostel and into a slightly bigger studio with real furniture, stuff I picked out myself, paid for myself, no strings attached. I started to feel like a whole person again. Which, of course, was when the letter came. It arrived in a crisp white envelope, addressed in Mom's neat cursive. My stomach twisted just looking at it. I opened it anyway. Ethan. We hope you're well. Your father was recently laid off again, and Kayla's tuition payments are overdue. The bank is threatening foreclosure. We know you've been doing better financially, and we're asking, no, begging, you to come home. Families should help each other in times of need. Please don't turn your back on us. Love. Mom. Attached was a second letter, this one from some low-rent lawyer I'd never heard of. Formal notice of intent to recover support funds. They were threatening to sue me for unpaid contributions, claiming I owed them for room and board from when I was a child. I read it twice, just to be sure I wasn't hallucinating. Then I laughed. I scanned every page and emailed them to Marcus. He called me the next morning, calm as ever. "This is garbage," he said. "You don't owe them a cent. If they try to escalate, we'll counter with documented proof you paid far more than any rent would have cost." I thanked him and hung up, hard hammering. The old me, the one who believed I was only as good as what I could give, might have folded. But I was tired of folding. I wrote one last email to Mom. Subject, family should help each other. Hi Mom. You're right, family should help each other. But real help doesn't look like guilt trips, threats, or legal notices. It looks like respect. It looks like accountability. It looks like love without conditions. I wish you all the best, but I will not be coming back. Please direct all further communication to my lawyer. Ethan. I hit send. And just like that, the invisible leash around my neck fell away. A few weeks later, Marcus called to say they dropped everything. No more letters. No more threats. Just silence. I stood in my kitchen that night, making pasta in a Rio pot, and thought about how far I'd come. No more walking on eggshells. No more financing other people's entitlement. No more hoping for an apology that would never come. Later, Marcus came over for dinner. We ate at my little thrifted table, candles flickering between us. At one point, he reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "I'm proud of you," he said simply. I swallowed the lump in my throat. "Me too." And for the first time in my life, I meant it.